I'm Dr. Cassie from NAVC's Vetfolio and the host of Vet2Vet. Keeping our patients up to date on vaccines is such an important part of veterinary medicine. With advances in vaccine technology, it's important to understand the option and probably even more crucial to be able to communicate that information effectively to pet owners. Here to help us navigate these important conversations is Dr. Laura Greene. In her role at Merck Animal Health, Dr. Greene works as a senior professional services veterinarian and serves as a national internal medicine expert, and has dedicated her career to improving animal health and the communication between veterinarians and pet owners. So, Dr. Greene, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have an opportunity to talk about all of this.
Me too. This is really exciting. Before we get to kind of the really exciting meat of things, let's start at the beginning, just with classes of vaccines. And, what are the different classes and how do they differ? It's in my mind somewhere, but I feel like I'm reaching way back and could definitely use a refresher.
Absolutely. It's one of those kind of ironies of life that in veterinary medicine, we spend a significant percentage of our time handling vaccines, administering vaccines, but I don't think we spend a lot of time getting a chance to review what exactly those vaccines are, how they work, how they do what they do. So it's nice to have the refresher. It can come in handy, especially when communicating to clients about the vaccine and what it is that we're hoping it's going to do. I generally think of vaccines as having three major classes that we have historically had in companion animal medicine. And recently now we have the addition of a member of a fourth class of vaccines. So if I'm going through the first three, the traditional ones that we've had, the first one I typically think of are our non-living vaccines. So that's going to be our killed bacteria or our inactivated viral vaccines. Think our leptospirosis vaccines, our Lyme borreliosis vaccines, or our rabies vaccines. They have some key advantages to them. The pathogen is dead, and there's some advantages to that in that it's pretty easy to make and they're quite safe to use. The disadvantage is that the pathogen is dead, and your immune system is really pretty smart about realizing that and not taking that vaccine message as seriously. So, what we typically have to do with that class of vaccines is add a danger signal, which we do in the form of an adjuvant. So that allows the immune system to take a little bit more notice of the vaccine, but the type of immune response we get is a little bit biased towards an antibody response and not as balanced of a response to include a cell-mediated or T cell response. So those are great vaccines. We use them for a lot of things. The other class, sort of the counterpart to that, would then be our living vaccines. We think about these as our attenuated live bacterial or our modified live viral vaccines. Attenuated live would be the oral Bordetella or our intranasal Bordetella vaccines. Modified live viral, parvovirus, parainfluenza virus, distemper virus, all of those are modified live. These vaccines have been hampered in some way so that the pathogen can no longer cause disease, but it can still infect some cells. It can still, in some cases, have some limited replication in the animal to be vaccinated. Big advantage there for how much attention the immune system pays to it. Your immune system sees that and gives a good, strong antibody mediated and cell mediated immune response. Disadvantage is not every pathogen lends itself to being safely modified or attenuated to not cause disease. So it doesn't work for everything we'd want to vaccinate against. And then our third historical class that we think of are our viral vectored vaccines. So in companion animal medicine, that's typically using a canary pox virus, which is limited to infection of birds, but is capable of actually getting into mammalian cells. It just doesn't cause any disease and it can't replicate. So we take these canary pox viruses and we genetically modify them to express or create a protein from a different pathogen that normally does cause disease. So for example, we teach a canary pox virus to express a rabies type protein, and that teaches the immune system how to recognize rabies. So in companion animal medicine, those are typically vaccines against rabies, distemper, feline leukemia virus. It's an excellent vaccine for causing both an antibody-mediated and a cell-mediated immune response, but it has some limitations in that it doesn't have optimal efficacy in every pathogen scenario that we'd want. So those are our three kind of traditional classes. And then, as you know, our newest addition in companion animal medicine is a nucleic acid vaccine, which is specifically an RNA particle vaccine.
And that is really exciting. When I first heard about this, the technology seems so cool. And let me stop for a minute too. And thank you for that explanation. I feel like you took a whole semester of, I wish I could remember the name of the class it was where we learned about all of this and just kind of summed it up so beautifully where I'm like, oh, okay, that makes so much sense. So thank you for that explanation. And I'm so looking forward to talking more about these RNA particle vaccines. Before we get too far down that road, why is it so important that we understand the different types of vaccines? We're pulling the vaccine off the shelf, we're giving it to the animal. Why does it matter what type of vaccine we're using?
Yeah, I think it can be really important to have some baseline knowledge about what these vaccines are and how they work, particularly in this day and age of increased pet owner scrutiny. They want to know more, they want to know how things work. And in particular, there is a not insignificant percentage of pet owners who are exhibiting some degree of vaccine hesitancy. I saw a survey not that long ago demonstrating that for pet owners who responded to that survey, as many as 53% of them had some feelings of vaccine hesitancy. They thought that the vaccines weren't safe or that they weren't effective or that they weren't necessary. And we don't want to walk into our appointment and say, sit down, I'm going to give you an entire vaccinology lecture about what all of these vaccines do. That's overwhelming and unnecessary. But when we're faced with pet owners who are a little hesitant, a little cautious, and want to know a little bit more about what this vaccine is, how it works, advantages and disadvantages, having just a little bit of a better understanding of what exactly we have in our hand and why we're using it can really make the difference to reassure pet owners that this is the best choice for their pet.
I think that makes a lot of sense. If we have a pet owner who is feeling hesitant, but hopefully has trust in their GP veterinarian, and they're asking, why do I need to do this? This doesn't seem like the right thing for my pet. If we can explain that from a place of knowledge and confidence, it seems like it seems natural we would get a lot better pet owner buy-in into the need, the safety, the efficacy for those vaccines, which is important. Of course, we want to protect our patients, but a big part of what we do is protect human health as well.
Absolutely. And I think that pet owners then feel more confident in opening and starting the conversation about the origin of their concerns and their vaccine hesitancy when we can demonstrate that we're willing to engage in that conversation.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. All right, I'm excited. Let's talk about RNA particle vaccines as we kind of touched on it a little bit. Tell us about the RNA particle vaccine.
Yeah, it's so exciting to have the opportunity to talk about this because this is the first new class of vaccine in companion animal vaccinology in nearly 25 years. So it's a remarkable innovation for us to have. So as I mentioned, RNA particle vaccines are a type of nucleic acid vaccine, and specifically Novavax Next RNA particle vaccine is one that uses mRNA technology to be able to deliver a very targeted and efficient message to the immune system about the pathogen to which we want to protect the animal. So they're really pretty straightforward. RNA particles are composed of just two parts. They have an outer coat protein and an inner RNA message. And that's it. That's all there is to them. But what's really important is to appreciate what each of those parts actually do for us. So if I think about what I need a vaccine to do for me, to be this messenger, and I need to deliver the message, who in the immune system needs to be the recipient? Who do we need to get this message to? And it turns out it's a cell type that you might not have thought about for some time. Probably back in first year vet school, this might have been introduced. It is a cell called a dendritic cell. So, dendritic cells are often referred to as a central player in the immune system. And the reason for that is that they exist almost everywhere in the body, and they specialize in both communication and vigilance. So, their job is to reach out with these very long projections called dendrites and sample the environment around them for anything that isn't supposed to be there. And once they find whatever that is, they take it in, they process it, and then they go back and they have the unique capability of teaching both B cells and T cells about what it is that they found, about how to recognize that foreign thing, say it's a pathogen like a bacteria or a virus, how to recognize it and to generate a strong immune response against it. The other big advantage to the Novavax Next RNA particles is that we deliver this RNA message, which is a copy of a gene of interest from a pathogen we want to teach the immune system to recognize. But for a limited period of time, that RNA message in the dendritic cell can actually make copies of itself. So now we can administer a really low dose of particles because they go right to the dendritic cell. And we can administer a really low dose because within the dendritic cell, the signal becomes amplified, kind of like having a loudspeaker for the dendritic cells to use when they're talking to both B cells and T cells, generating a really strong antibody mediated and cell mediated immune response. It's a really cool, really efficient system.
I feel like now you've summed up two of my classes in vet school and first year vet school just so succinctly, and it's so helpful. And now I have so many questions. This sounds like a very simple system, and so I'm thinking if there's only two parts of this vaccine, like you said, you can administer a low amount. So I guess my questions would be, are we talking about low volume vaccines, non-adjuvanted, kind of all of these advantages? And do we know kind of what role that plays when it comes to vaccine reactions?
Yeah. So, again, to your point, the Novavax Next RNA particles are very efficient, are very targeted. So, when we're talking low dose both from the standpoint of physically, we can actually administer these vaccines as a 0.5 ml dose. Also, just in what the vaccine contains, it contains a relatively low number of particles because they are very efficient. And those particles, because they go directly to the dendritic cell, they provide the dendritic cell with everything that it needs to begin teaching B cells and T cells. They do not necessarily require an adjuvant. They are preservative-free vaccines. They are thimerosal-free vaccines. It's just a really clean model of vaccine to be able to use. And in practice, when these are administered and when the first Novavax Next vaccine in the United States was originally going through its initial field safety studies, they were very comfortable vaccines to have be administered to our pets with a very low adverse event profile.
That's so exciting. So exciting. And I understand that this Novavax Next vaccine is an influenza vaccine, is what we're talking about, and a monovalent influenza vaccine. So I would assume even lower particles, probably. Why was this not developed as a bivalent influenza vaccine?
Yeah, so our first Novavax Next vaccine in the United States is Novavax Next Canine Influenza H3N2. So it helps to have a little bit of influenza history when we're talking about canine influenza in the United States. It all started for us here in the US in 2004 when an equine influenza kind of gained the technology, if you will, to successfully begin to infect dogs and to transmit from dog to dog. So that was canine influenza H3N8. And back in 2004, we had multiple outbreaks of that occurring with a low degree of dog to dog transmission. And then in 2015, a second canine influenza made its first impression here in the United States. That was canine influenza H3N2, which is adapted from birds. So, canine influenza H3N2 had a little bit better of a job when it made that leap, if you will, from avian influenza to canine influenza at persisting in dog to dog transmission. It has a much longer post shedding period, up to 3 weeks post infection, that it can continue to shed canine influenza H3N2. And in addition, we've seen multiple reintroductions of H3N2 into the United States, and we can talk a little bit about why that is. But when it comes to H3N8, with the surveillance laboratories that monitor canine influenza in the US, for example, IDEXX or the Cornell influenza monitoring surveillance program, they have not seen H3N8 in the United States since 2017. That is the last time. And if you look actually at the most recent version of Greene's Infectious Diseases of the Dog and Cat, kind of that manual of infectious disease, the authors, when they wrote that, said that at this time, it appears that H3N8 is extinct. It's actually the word they used was extinct in the United States. Huge
That is,
victory.
yes, that's hugely exciting to have gotten this influenza strain out of the United States.
It is.
I'm curious now that since they say they haven't seen it since 2017, I just remember like 2017 sticks out in my brain because that's when we had an influenza outbreak locally. And yeah, it was a mess.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really remarkable how devastating these influenza outbreaks can be. And we're still seeing them all the time. And one of the things that's really tricky about canine influenza, and I think a really important talking point for pet owners, this is something I really like to emphasize, is that when pet owners often think about the flu, they think about their seasonal flu, like it's going to come around, it's going to be every year, it's going to happen at the same time. You kind of know what to expect with it. With canine influenza H3N2, we don't know when it's going to pop back up again or where it's going to pop back up again. So I alluded to the fact that many of the H3N2 outbreaks that we see are new introductions of H3N2 to the US. Some of that comes from the fact that we have multiple rescue groups in the United States that rescue dogs from other countries. And when those dogs are imported and brought to shelters in the United States, for one thing, they find themselves in close proximity with a lot of other dogs. They may look perfectly healthy because they may be one of the 20% of dogs that get canine influenza and asymptomatically shed it. Or maybe they had canine influenza and recovered, but are still in that 3-week post-infection shedding period. So they have an amazing capability of being able to spread it through the shelter where they initially find themselves. And then there are additional programs that can actually find dogs that are in shelters that are overcrowded, that don't have a high enough demand for adoptable dogs, and they relocate them to destination shelters. Great way to have all of these pets find their forever homes. But canine influenza really likes to take advantage of that particular situation. So if you go to a website like dogflu.com, there's actually a map there that'll let you see where dogs have been testing positive for canine influenza H3N2 over the last several months. And you see it just kind of pops up around the United States in any of a number of different locations. Very hard to know when and where that will happen.
I think that's so many good points that you made, just that you don't know when and where it's going to pop up. It's not a seasonal flu like what we see in humans. That was certainly my experience, is it felt like it came out of nowhere and all of a sudden it was everywhere when we were dealing with an outbreak. And I mean, 20% coming, I say coming into the United States, but just in general, 20% that can get infected and not show clinical signs. So even our importation guidelines that are being updated and we're seeing become more and more strict wouldn't necessarily catch an asymptomatic dog shedding influenza.
Exactly. Those are so hard to catch. And, you can have early signs of it that are perhaps a little bit more subtle. Now, as we know, canine influenza, that situation, those outbreaks get really serious really quickly because the infectivity of H3N2 is quite dramatic. Generally, one of the ways that you start to have your radar go up that you're facing an influenza outbreak is you start off with one coughing dog and you say, oh, well, it's an example of canine infectious respiratory disease complex, could be any of a number of different pathogens. They all look the same at the start. But 24 to 48 hours later, your phone is ringing off the hook and you have every sick appointment filled and you've got 15 coughing dogs and some of them are really sick. And you have to start thinking about how long it takes to decontaminate your exam rooms, how long it takes to, have all of your personal protective equipment, everything that you need to try and control this and limit the spread. And the truth of the matter is that by the time you have an outbreak, it's too late to do anything to protect anyone else within that immediate vicinity. You kind of have to just hunker down and wait until it manages to kind of fizzle itself out. So the time to protect our pets against canine influenza is long before we're ever worried that one is actually occurring in our area.
Absolutely. I think, we can't remind ourselves or be reminded enough how sneaky and smart the influenza viruses are.
Yep. The other big thing that comes up with that is people think like it's just a cold, it's not so bad, or they think, well, I don't have a social dog. I'm not taking my dog to dog parks. I'm not taking my dog to dog shows or something like that. But the truth of the matter is, in a beautiful way, dogs have become so integrated into our lives and they go with us to so many different locations. They come with us to restaurants. They sometimes come with us to sporting events. We're taking them for walks in the neighborhood. And I always say that if your dog's nose goes where any other dog's nose has been, they're officially social. So if you're walking them through the neighborhood and they sniff the same tree that the dog that came through 5 minutes ago did, they've had a chance for exposure. If they pass another dog in the parking lot on the way into your veterinary appointment for an annual exam, they're a social dog. If they never go anywhere, but they touch noses with the dog through the fence next door who does go to all of those places, you now have a social dog. So it's much harder to find an antisocial dog than most pet owners think.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've certainly seen that exact example of, canine infectious respiratory disease complex and the only thing we could identify is where the walks around the neighborhood. So this is really exciting with having this influenza vaccine available in this new type of vaccine technology. What do you see for the future of RNA particle vaccines?
What's really exciting about RNA particle vaccines is that they do exist as a type of platform vaccine, which means that you can understand exactly how it works. It's got this outer coat protein that targets its dendritic cells. It's always going to do that. It's always going to act the exact same way. What can change is the inner RNA message that we put in there. And so we have the capability of being able to target any of a wide variety of pathogens simply by changing out the gene of interest, that mRNA message that we send inside that coat protein. And the way that we do that is pretty simple, it's straightforward, and it's really quite rapid to be able to do this. So it gives us a lot of latitude for being able to protect against the diseases that are a problem for our veterinary patients today, but also to have a swift response to any emerging pathogens that come up in the future.
That is so cool to just be able to kind of swap out the message inside the vaccine and have a whole new vaccine that quickly.
I think of them as really good, really flexible teachers. They can teach a lot of different types of curriculums, and yet their teaching style. You're familiar with how it works, and that's a nice thing to have, and a pretty easy one to be able to talk with pet owners about.
And I love that you bring up talking to pet owners about this because we mentioned vaccine hesitancy before and maybe owners who don't think their dog is social but is more social than they think. How do you communicate with clients who are exhibiting vaccine hesitancy?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing is to be able to open a dialogue to say, let's talk a little bit about what this is to make sure that we can demonstrate that we do have some knowledge of what the vaccine that we're recommending is and how it works. And then really importantly, let's talk about what it is that this vaccine is designed to prevent, because I think that the two areas that sometimes are not as fully fleshed out, fully developed for pet owners in their minds are one, exactly how does this vaccine work? It's not this magical or black box, if you will, of substances that we're putting in your pet. This is what it is. I know what it is. I know how it works. Let me tell you succinctly, not in a textbook, but a succinct description of this. But then also, let's talk about what it is that we are trying to protect your pet from. Let's talk about canine influenza and the damage that it can cause when these outbreaks occur. Perhaps pet owners are not familiar with the fact that one of the primary characteristics of canine influenza is causing lesions in the lung. It's causing consolidation. It's causing petechial hemorrhages. It's causing damage to the lower airways. And that is a classic representative sign of canine influenza, that indeed, to be able to have a vaccine be approved, you have to demonstrate that the vaccine is capable of reducing or preventing the formation of those kind of lung lesions. And I think pet owners may not realize that that's what we're talking about trying to prevent, not just a bad cold or my pet doesn't feel well for a while. We're preventing those lung lesions. We're preventing a hospital stay that can be quite expensive. I saw a survey not that long ago that indicated that for about 42% of pet owners, a veterinary bill of $1,000 or more can send them into debt. A severe case of canine influenza can absolutely run up those kind of costs. And that's what we're trying to prevent with vaccines. And laying some of those facts out, I think, can really help to open up the conversation to what it is their concern is and why it could be really important to try and reconsider.
Yes, and so you did a great job summarizing the impact on certainly on the pet owner, but also on the veterinary clinic. You kind of mentioned earlier the amount of time it takes to disinfect an exam room. And I have this vague memory after dealing with an influenza outbreak of the time it took to disinfect each exam room being pretty substantial and slowing things down. That can be really burdensome in a veterinary clinic.
It absolutely can. I think that's another one of those things that we sometimes don't take into account, is that when these influenza outbreaks hit, the impact on the day-to-day functioning and the stress levels in a veterinary clinic can be so remarkable. So, as you mentioned, you have that first case come in and they're coughing, and you have them go through perhaps your isolation where you have any dog that you're suspicious of a canine infectious respiratory disease complex. But when you're done seeing that patient, you have to keep in mind that canine influenza can live on hands for 12 hours, can live on clothing for 24 hours, and can persist in your exam room if it is not appropriately disinfected for 48 hours. The disinfection process takes a decent amount of time, making sure that you are not spreading canine influenza throughout your clinic. When it's one dog, that's not so much of a burden. But that's the problem with canine influenza, is that it's never just one dog. It's all of the dogs, and you have all of your regular appointments, and you want to make sure that your regular appointments are not coming in contact with any of the dogs that are suspected or confirmed to have canine influenza. And your phone is ringing off the hook, and it takes 50% more time than it took to do anything because of these disinfection requirements. It can really become very overwhelming very quickly.
Dr. Greene, this is just an exciting conversation. The review of vaccine technology and immunology is invaluable, and I'm so excited about the idea of RNA particle vaccines and this influenza vaccine. Thank you so much for all of the information. Thank you for joining me. What a great talk.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much. I hope that immunology is a little less scary for people now. It can be a lot of fun.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you to Merck Animal Health for partnering with us for this edition of Vet2Vet. Check out NAVC's vetfolio.com for more of our V2V discussions on various topics in veterinary medicine. And remember, if one animal is better off because of you today, it's a great day.